That night was supposed to be nothing more than another banal chapter of youth, but the silence that followed turned everything into a scar. He promised to pick her up the next day, eyes brimming with tears and lips trembling with emotion. But the next day came, and with it, only emptiness. Her calls went straight to voicemail. Her messages vanished as if swallowed by a black hole. She didn't cry during the first week. She couldn't. She was too busy trying to understand how someone who claimed to love so deeply could vanish without explanation. Her friends said he wasn't worth anything, but none of them knew what it was like to carry a piece of him in her own womb. She looked in the mirror and saw his eyes growing inside her. Every bout of nausea was a reminder of the abandonment. Every beat of the baby's heart felt like a question that would never have an answer. It wasn't just him who disappeared. It was the future she had imagined, the family she believed she was building, the plan sketched on coffee shop napkins, the baby names that would never be spoken aloud. She decided to hide the pregnancy from everyone. Not out of shame, but for self-protection. Growing up in a family with a heavy last name, where every scandal made the headlines, taught her that pain, when exposed, becomes a spectacle. And she was tired of being the talk of the day. In that cold mansion, filled with hidden inheritances and smiles with ulterior motives, she had learned to swallow her tears with the same ease she sipped tea with her grandparents. Her father, CEO of a business conglomerate, barely noticed her existence. Her mother, a prisoner of appearances, used to say that the only unforgivable mistake for a woman was getting pregnant without a ring on her finger. So she pretended everything was fine, kept attending social events, kept smiling in pictures, kept being the perfect heiress everyone expected, except for one thing. Deep down, she had changed. She was no longer just a daughter. She was a mother. The months passed like slow knives cutting through the days. She felt her body changing, her mind expanding, and her soul bleeding. Every ultrasound was done in secret, every appointment made under a false name. Deep down, she knew she was fighting a silent war against abandonment, against fear, against the uncertainty of what to do when the baby finally arrived. But she also knew that behind her fragile appearance, there was a strength no one had ever noticed, and it was precisely because of that strength that she didn't give up. While everyone slept, she studied. While everyone smiled falsely, she cried in silence. And when her belly became too big to hide, she left the mansion. With one bag, 3 pieces of clothing, and her pride intact, she rented a small studio in a neighborhood where no one knew her name. For the first time, it was just her and the child. No inheritance, no last name, no one to applaud, and for the first time, she felt free. The birth happened on a rainy night, with no flowers, no photos, no visitors. Just a quiet doctor, a kind nurse, and a cry that changed everything. When she held the baby in her arms, an unspoken promise was born with him. She would raise that boy to be strong, not out of revenge, but for justice. Not to prove anything to anyone, but so he would never have to beg for love the way she once did. The following years were a time of new beginnings. She took on simple jobs, from bookstore clerk to kitchen assistant. While the baby slept, she studied economics. When he grew a little, she enrolled in night classes. She wore the same coat for 3 winters, and ate rice with eggs with gratitude. And with every step, she silently wrote down the names of those who ignored her, not out of resentment, but because one day, she would need to remember who taught her to stay silent, and who would deserve to hear her voice. Her mother called once, but she didn't answer. Her father sent an automated birthday message, but she deleted it. The family continued living among Persian rugs and dinners with politicians, pretending the eldest daughter was studying abroad. And in a way, she was a forced exchange between disdain and courage. Years later, with a degree in hand and a small business growing, she read in the newspaper that the family empire was on the verge of collapse. The decades-old company was being mismanaged. Her father had fallen ill. The partners were fighting. That's when she understood. The inheritance everyone tried to protect was crumbling, and only she held the keys to rebuild it. Because while everyone was busy trying to erase her from the story, she was learning to write the next chapter. She returned through the front door, dressed with the same elegance she had learned from her mother, but with the eyes of someone who knew the real world. The staff didn't recognize her at first, but one look from her was enough for silence to take over the house. Her mother turned pale. Her father tried to get up, but his physical weakness now matched the emotional weakness he had always had. She said nothing. She sat at the head of the table where he had always sat, and let the weight of her presence speak for itself. When he realized who she was, it was too late. The ex, the one who vanished, showed up years later asking for forgiveness, said he was afraid, said he was young, sighed he still thought about her. She listened to everything in silence, with the same calm of someone who had already lived the pain, overcome the anger, and turned the storm into peace. And then she simply smiled. She didn't want revenge. She wanted distance. He, now unemployed, only found out at the end of the conversation that the building they were sitting in, that fancy restaurant where he begged for a second chance, was her property. And the waiter who served him was her employee. She paid the bill with a corporate card bearing the name of the restructured family empire, now under her command, and walked out without looking back. Because when a woman finds her own strength, she no longer needs validation from those who broke her. This is a story of silence, strength, and return. A story for those who were once invisible, for those who were once forgotten, and for those who chose to start over with what was left of their heart. If you've made it this far, it's because you feel that something inside you also deserves a second chance. So subscribe now, your free dorama channel, here on YouTube. When Hae-jin accepted the invitation to that business dinner, she never imagined she'd find the past sitting at the head table, wearing the same kind of suit he once swore he'd never wear. The restaurant was sophisticated, the silverware polished, the silence broken only by the clinking of glasses and rehearsed laughter. Everything seemed perfect until she saw his name on the guest list, a crooked letter on the paper that brought back memories she had fought to forget. Ha-jin didn't leave. She sat down with the elegance she'd learned to forge through pain, and waited, because now she was the host. And he was just another man trying to fit into a world that never belonged to him. His eyes took a while to find her. Maybe because he never expected to see her there. Maybe because the last image he had of her was a girl with tears in her eyes and a pregnancy test in her hands. When he finally recognized her, his lips trembled and the fork dropped silently onto the empty plate. Haveen said nothing. She kept her discreet smile, straight posture, and calm gaze. Time had sculpted her pain in silence. And now she no longer needed to scream to be heard. While the others spoke of figures, mergers, and investments, he couldn't take his eyes off her. Every one of her gestures intimidated him. It was as if he were seeing a version of Hae-jin he had never deserved to know. The woman before him carried no grudges, she carried power. And that was exactly what frightened him the most. Because he knew what he had done. He remembered every lie told, every message ignored, every escape disguised as confusion. And now, standing before her, he realized what he had lost. When the dinner ended, she rose calmly, picked up her genuine leather purse, and walked past him without haste. But before leaving, she said just one sentence. "I still remember what you promised the day you left me." There was no anger in her voice. There was firmness. A firmness born from someone who survived abandonment, indifference, and the loneliness of being a mother alone in a world that doesn't want to hear the cry of a broken woman. He looked for her in the days that followed. Sent flowers, messages, even tried to contact her office. But no one answered. Because Hae-jin knew that some doors, once closed, should never be reopened. And she didn't want answers, she wanted distance. He was just the starting point, not the destination. And she had walked so far that going back to that kind of pain seemed impossible. Their son, now 7 years old, had his eyes. But the look was only appearance. The boy was strong, sweet, and curious like her. He never knew about his father. Heijin chose to raise him far from the shadow of the one who fled. She told him stories of courage, not of cowardice. She spoke of how people may leave, but a mother's love is the foundation of everything. And the boy grew up with the steadiness of someone who is fully loved. Meanwhile, in the family company, the situation was critical. The desperate shareholders proposed bringing her back officially. But she accepted only under one condition: total control. No interference, no outdated advice, no opinions from those who had excluded her years before. They agreed because they had no choice. And Heijin entered that building for the second time, not as the heiress, but as the CEO. The company's main hall still smelled of arrogance. But she was no longer the girl who walked lightly so as not to disturb the executives. Now every step she took echoed with authority. The old board members looked at her with apprehension. They knew who she was, but they didn't know the woman she had become. And that scared them, because she wasn't driven by power, but by justice. In the first few months, she restructured processes, cut internal excesses, invested in innovation, and sought out invisible talent that had never been given a chance. The company's name returned to the headlines, but now as a symbol of resilience and rebirth. And no one dared question Heijin's decisions. She had numbers, intelligence, and a story that didn't need to be told publicly, to be felt by everyone. It was in that scenario that he appeared again. This time, asking for a formal meeting. He was unemployed, his resume stained by scandals and failed projects. He had aged poorly. His eyes were lost, his shoulders slumped, his voice lacked conviction. But the worst part was the absence of true remorse. He still thought that simply showing up was enough for everything to go back to how it was. But the before had died the day he turned his back on her. Heijin received him courteously. They met in her glass office, overlooking the entire city. He tried to explain himself. Spoke of fear, youth, family pressure. Told sweet lies and distorted memories. But she just listened. Not because she wanted to forgive him, but because she wanted to say goodbye to the version of herself that once loved him. And when he finished, she stood, walked to the window, and said, "What you abandoned was love. What you found again is consequence." He went silent. For the first time, he understood there was no going back. That the once fragile and dependent woman was now untouchable. And all he had left was the memory of someone he once had and didn't know how to hold. Heijin didn't scream, didn't cry, didn't ask for explanations. She simply returned to her work. Because some answers aren't written with words, they're written with choices. In the elevator, he looked at the employees who greeted her with respect, at the rooms bearing her name, at the projects signed by her. And he realized that losing someone strong is different from losing anything else, because the absence of someone who rebuilt herself is a mirror reflecting the failure of the one who didn't know how to stay. That night, she returned home, found her son playing, and felt a peace that not even an entire empire could buy, because everything she needed was already there, and everything else was just noise. On the morning her grandfather's will was revealed, all eyes were on her, and not out of pride. Heijin, seated in the dark leather armchair, read each clause with the serenity of someone who no longer flinches at contempt. The other, heirs, murmured among themselves, trying to understand why, even after everything, she would receive the largest share of the estate. None of them knew about the secret conversations she had with her grandfather in recent years. None of them knew about the silent dinners, the handwritten letters, the whispered advice shared between sips of wine. The old patriarch had seen in her the only descendant with the courage to carry the empire, without dirtying her hands. Her mother's expression was a portrait of defeat. The same woman who once said that a child without marriage was a curse now silently watched her daughter become the pillar that would hold everything together. Heijin didn't need revenge, she already had presence. And there, in the center of the room, without raising her voice, she showed everyone the weight of someone who had survived exclusion and still came back to save the house that once tried to erase her. She inherited not only the name and the assets, but also the ghosts. The family's secrets were old acquaintances, buried documents, shady deals, partnerships that kept the empire alive through moral life support. Now she would have to decide what to keep and what to bury for good. The past was no longer a shadow. It was a choice. And Heijin was no longer afraid to turn on the light. The next day, she called a meeting with the former board members. Many turned up their noses when they saw her at the head of the table. Some didn't show up at all. Others arrived deliberately late, but everyone listened in silence when she began to speak. Her voice was firm, steady, unwavering. She presented data, projects, cuts, and new hires. She spoke of ethics as naturally as breathing. And when she finished, she didn't ask for approval. She simply announced, "From today on, this is how it will be." Some tried to resist. They argued tradition, experience, politics. But no argument could stand against the clarity of the numbers and the transparency of her leadership. Because what she was doing wasn't just management, it was course correction. For a story written for far too long by hands that were far too dirty. And gradually, even the most resistant began to fall silent. Because competence silences even the deepest prejudice. As she reorganized the business, she also rebuilt bonds with the forgotten employees. She visited overlooked apartments, listened to stories no one else cared to hear. She valued those who stayed late, those who never received raises, those whose talents were suffocated by hierarchy. And they began to follow her not out of obligation, but out of admiration. Because she did what no one else had done. She treated each person as essential. One day, a former cleaning lady came to her in tears. She handed her a letter that Heijin's grandmother had written decades earlier. A hidden letter, left inside an old book in the headquarters library. The letter spoke of fear, of choices, of the pain of raising children in silence, and the hope that one granddaughter would break the cycle. That woman, who had once been called the maid and maid, invisible, now held the CEO's hand with gratitude. And in that moment, Heijin understood. She wasn't there only for herself, but for all the women erased from that story. At home, her son had begun asking questions. He wanted to know why she spent so much time away, why his grandparents didn't know him, why his father never called. She always answered gently, but never lied. She told him that sometimes people don't know how to love, but that he had been loved from the very first moment. And that if one day he wanted to meet his father, she would support him. Because it's not about erasing the past, it's about not letting it define the present. It was during one of those conversations that the boy asked to meet his grandparents. At first, she hesitated. She was afraid to expose him to the coldness that once hurt her, but she agreed. She took him on a Sunday after arranging an informal meeting without saying much. When they arrived at the mansion, the silence was thick. Her mother opened the door hesitantly. Her father appeared in the hallway with the same distant gaze. But something changed when they saw the child. Because he didn't carry the weight of rejection, only curiosity. The grandfather, once rigid, slowly bent down and shook the boy's hand. The grandmother, not knowing what to say, offered tea. It was a tense meeting, but a necessary one. Because in that cold environment, the innocent warmth of a child melted layers that decades of coexistence had failed to thaw. And for a few minutes, Heijin realized that perhaps there was still room for rebuilding. not forgiveness, but RECONNECTION. In the following days, the grandparents began to call. They asked about their grandson, sent books, toys, even invitations for lunch. Ha-Jin kept her guard up, but accepted. Because her son deserved to know all his roots, even the ones that hurt his mother. And seeing her parents try, even if late, she felt something close to relief. Because it's not necessary to forget what was done, just not carry the weight of it forever. In the midst of all this, the ex tried to approach the boy. He sent a letter, wrote that he wanted to meet him, that he regretted it. Hae-jin read the letter alone many times before deciding what to do. She talked to her son, explained who he was, told the story honestly. The boy remained silent. After a few days, he said he wanted to see him, and she allowed it. But with one condition, that the meeting happen in the most impersonal place possible. They scheduled it at a cafe, with people around, no atmosphere for reconciliation. When he arrived, he was nervous. Tried to joke, tried to create a connection. But the boy was too smart for that. He listened, observed, and then said, "My mom never lied about you. And I'm happy with what I have." That was enough to shatter him. Because nothing hurts more than realizing your absence wasn't missed. Hae thanked her son for his maturity. And that night, when she tucked him into bed, she felt something inside her finally close. A door, a wound, a longing. Not because the past disappeared, but because she had finally completed a cycle. The abandoned girl had become the woman who protects. When the invitation to the charity dinner arrived, with her name printed in gold and the family foundation's logo at the top, Hae-jin felt the weight of irony. It was the same foundation that once refused to fund her education for not aligning with the institutional image. Now she was the one funding it. She was the one signing the checks, choosing the projects, appointing the directors. But even with all that control, something inside her hesitated. Because the room where the event would take place was the same one where, years ago, she had heard her father say that an unmarried pregnant daughter was an irreversible stain. She entered the hall in a black dress with a sober cut, hair tied back, and a serene expression. The flashes followed her like a disciplined swarm. No one dared approach her without permission. The woman who was once treated as a shameful footnote in the family was now the epicenter. But she wasn't seeking revenge on that stage. She was seeking silent justice, the kind built through steady presence and measured words. She wasn't shouting to the world that she had won. She simply walked like someone who owed nothing to anymore. During dinner, the glances turned to her with admiration, but also with caution. Many there knew the story, others only imagined. And everyone knew that since she had taken the lead, no injustice went unpunished. When she stepped onto the stage to speak, she didn't mention the past. She spoke about opportunity, about invisible women, about children who grow up without a surname, about mothers who build empires alone. Each of her words was an arrow, but wrapped in silk. And when she finished, the hall gave her a standing ovation, including those who had once judged her. At the end of the event, as the guests began to leave, an elderly woman approached her. She was an old friend of her grandmother, someone she hadn't seen since childhood. The woman held a small box with an old brooch. "Your grandmother asked me to keep this until the day you were ready." Hae-jin opened the box and saw the family symbol, two intertwined silver wings with an emerald in the center. It wasn't just an accessory. It was a seal. A reminder that, despite everything, there were roots that wanted to see her fly. In the following days, she began to receive letters from women who saw themselves in her journey. Abandoned mothers, rejected daughters, professionals who faced veiled contempt in male-dominated environments. Some wrote to thank her, others to unburden themselves. But all recognized in her a rare strength, the ability to turn pain into leadership. And it was then that Hae-jin realized her story was bigger than her own pain. She had become a symbol, Not out of vanity, but out of survival. In one of those letters, an employee from a branch revealed a scandal. Women were being passed over for promotions because they became pregnant. The practice was informal, disguised, but cruel. Jin investigated it personally, gathered data, spoke with every woman involved, exposed those responsible, and restructured internal policies. The company that once excluded her was now becoming a reference in inclusion and equity, because she knew firsthand what it was like to lose opportunities for carrying life inside her own body. While fighting these battles in the corporate world, her personal life remained in a comforting silence. Her son grew up healthy, curious, with a sensitivity she recognized as a mirror of herself. One day, returning from school, he asked, "Mom, why do some kids have two last names and I only have yours?" She smiled and replied, "Because mine is enough for both of us." And he smiled back, because deep down, he already knew. One day, while reviewing contracts at the office, she was informed that her ex had been hospitalized after an emotional collapse. He was alone, unemployed, with accumulated debts and distant friends. The news didn't make her smile, nor did it sadden her. It only confirmed what she already knew. Those who run from responsibility eventually meet their own emptiness. Still, she decided to visit him. Not for him, but for herself. Because she deserved to see with her own eyes the end of a cycle. When she entered the hospital room, he was lying down, pale, with deep circles under his eyes. He tried to pull himself together upon seeing her, but there was no more strength in his posture. She sat down, looked at him with a mix of distance and compassion. He said, "You won." She replied, "I survived." And that was all. There was no forgiveness, no anger. Only silence where once there were empty promises. Before leaving, she left an envelope with their son's name on it. It wasn't money. It was a letter. A letter written by her, explaining who his father was, what had happened, and how he might one day respond to his son if he had the courage. After that, she left and never returned. Because some visits don't need to be repeated. There. Rituals of closure. As the world began to notice her story, Jin received an invitation to give a lecture at a prestigious university. The theme, female leadership in hostile environments. As she stepped onto the stage, she saw hundreds of young people looking at her like someone who had defied the odds. And for the first time, she felt that all the pain had transformed into purpose. She told her story with strength, without victimhood. She spoke about abandonment, motherhood, silence, and rebuilding. And at the end, she said, "Being strong isn't about not feeling pain. It's about not letting it stop you." She was met with a standing ovation. And as she stepped off the stage, she saw in the crowd the same woman who once denied her an internship for not fitting the family profile. Now she wanted a photo with the CEO. The invitation to the international ceremony arrived with the seal of the Seoul Business Council, and a detail that didn't go unnoticed. Her name was the only female one among the honorees. Jin stared at the envelope for several minutes before opening it. It wasn't just recognition. It was an entry pass into a world that, for decades, had been sealed off from women who dared to exist outside the rules. Now she wouldn't just enter, she would be celebrated. But even with all the honor, what occupied her mind most was the need to remain true to her essence in an environment where everyone expected she had already become just like them. In the main hall of the event, the lights reflected off expensive gowns and rehearsed smiles. But no sparkle was as real as the gaze of someone carrying stories on her back. Jin walked up to the stage with the same calm she had when putting her son to sleep. She spoke about transformation, not success. About humanity, not power. She said that a true empire isn't built from steel, but from ethical choices that withstand the temptations of ego. And when she finished, there was no forced applause, only silence. The kind of silence that precedes genuine respect. As she left the stage, a businessman approached and proposed $1 million project with clauses that benefited only him. She smiled politely and declined with a simple, "I don't need this." The refusal went viral behind the scenes like a legend. Heiress wasn't there to please. She was there to show that it was possible to rise without stepping on others. And because of that, everyone began to both fear and admire her at the same time. Meanwhile, in the company, she launched a scholarship program aimed at single mothers. Each candidate received not only financial support, but also psychological, counseling and self-esteem workshops. It wasn't philanthropy, it was reparation. She told her employees, "I don't want you to be like me. I want you to have more support than I had." And because of that, what she built began to go beyond the company. It became a movement. Her now 9-year-old son began to understand who his mother was, not just through her fame, but through her actions. He saw how she treated employees, how she listened more than she spoke, how she set boundaries with grace. One day, after watching her end a tense meeting with a simple, "That was my final word," he said, "You don't have to yell because your voice already carries weight." And in that moment, Heiress felt she had planted more than strength. She had sown dignity, but not everything was success without challenge. A former employee, now rising in politics, tried to use Heiress' name to boost her own image. She gave interviews twisting stories, published out-of-context email excerpts. When the controversy erupted, everyone expected a harsh statement, a direct attack. But Heiress responded with an open letter, handwritten, published in a printed newspaper. The letter didn't attack. It simply said, "I'm sorry that the thirst for visibility won over honesty. I hope you find the peace I had to rebuild." The letter was reproduced in 5 languages. That same month, she was invited to appear on a television program. The live interview shook all the host's assumptions. When asked whether she had forgiven her son's father, she said, "I didn't need to forgive him because he never apologized. And I learned not to ask for what someone doesn't know how to give." The response caused a national stir. The host cried. The audience went silent. And once again, she left without raising any flags, just being who she was. Her mother, who for years had pretended nothing had happened, now called frequently. She tried to reclaim a place she had never known how to build. Heiress listened, scheduled lunches, allowed some closeness, but kept invisible barriers. There was no resentment, only protection. She didn't want to punish her mother. She just didn't want to bleed anymore trying to be accepted. And so, even in the hugs, there was just enough distance for her not to lose herself. Her father, now weakened, also sought reconciliation. He asked her to attend a private ceremony on behalf of the family, and Heiress went. Not out of obedience, but for closure. She sat beside him, listened to his attempted justification, and replied, "You taught me to be strong through absence. And for that I thank you." That was their last conversation. He passed away weeks later, and at the funeral she was discreet, but present. Because sometimes presence is the only farewell needed. After his death, old letters were discovered, kept by a household employee. In them, the father expressed regret, though he never had the courage to say it aloud. He asked that, if he ever reunited with his daughter, he wouldn't try to explain, only ask her to raise their grandson with the strength he knew she had. Heiress read the letters in silence. She cried, not for what was lost, but for what could have been. Then she put them in a box. Not to forget, but to remember that even absences have stories. On a trip abroad for a social innovation conference, she was surprised with a tribute from mothers from various countries who had been inspired by her journey. They hugged her like someone reuniting with a sister they had never met. And there, surrounded by strangers who knew exactly how she felt, Heiress understood she no longer carried her story alone. She was a bridge. Back in Korea, she was invited to a meeting with an international fund that wanted to invest in her initiatives. But there was a clause. They wanted to appoint a man as the public face to better represent the traditional profile of global investors. He-jin stood up from the table, gathered the papers, and said, "If tradition means making invisible the women who build, I'd rather face bankruptcy." And she left. 3 days later, the fund dropped the clause and doubled the offer. She no longer spoke about her ex. Not out of indifference, but irrelevance. He lived in another city, starting over. From time to time, he sent polite messages about their son, asked about visits, tried to build some connection. He-jin allowed occasional visits, but never opened. Too much space. The boy, in turn, already knew exactly who he was. And he respected his mother as if she were a gentle fortress. The boy had started writing small texts, poems, memories. One day, he left a notebook on his mother's desk. In it, he wrote, "When I grow up, I want to be someone who doesn't make you cry." He-jin read that and felt the sweetest weight life could offer. Having broken the chain of pain and having finally planted a new lineage of men. He-jin never sought to be a symbol of anything. For years, her only goal was to survive, to protect her son, to breathe without it hurting. She didn't want trophies or statues. She wanted peaceful nights of sleep, eyes that didn't cry. In the dark, and an ordinary day when she could walk without carrying open wounds. But over time, she understood that some people are chosen by pain to show others that it's possible to get through it. And even without asking for it, she became a reference. One afternoon, during a special interview about women who changed the course of business history in the country, she was asked, "If you could go back to the past, would you change anything?" He-jin thought. She didn't answer quickly, because she knew that pain had shaped her strength, but it was still pain. So she said, "I would change who abandoned me, but I wouldn't change who I became." And that was it. The answer summed up years of cycles, silences, of tears wiped from her face when no one was watching. Her son was now a preteen. He had his own ideas, strong convictions, and a love for her that went beyond admiration. It was gratitude. One time, after a presentation at school, he hugged her and said, "You are my home." He-jin smiled, holding back tears, because she understood in that moment that in the end, the entire empire she inherited, rebuilt and multiplied, was never greater than what she built inside her own home, the family mansion. Once the stage of her rejection, was now used for social projects. She had turned the luxurious bedrooms into dormitories for scholarship students from rural areas. The grand ballroom became a library. The once untouchable garden now served as a space for outdoor activities, with mothers learning together how to take their lives back. She kept the place alive, not with parties, but with rewritten stories. In one of the hallways of that old house, He-jin came across the mirror where, years ago, she had seen herself pregnant and scared. She stopped in front of it, now more mature, more whole. She didn't look for wrinkles or signs of time. She looked into her eyes, and she recognized them. They were the same. But now there was something different. They no longer asked to be seen, they simply saw. Her name began to appear in books, documentaries, magazines, but she never let fame consume her. She still went to the same cafes, the same small restaurants, crossed the street the same calm way. She knew that true luxury was freedom. And for her, freedom meant no longer needing to prove anything to one. A young reporter tried to write a story exploiting her romantic past, aiming for headlines about abandonment, the father of her child, scandals. But He-jin simply replied, "My past isn't gossip, it's fertile soil. Whoever wants to plant in it must come with respect." And the story was never published. Because even in silence, she already set boundaries. Her son began accompanying her to some lectures. He observed everything attentively. Once, after seeing a young mother tearfully hugging her daughter after hearing Habjin speak, he whispered, "You didn't just save me, did you?" And she simply replied, "No, but it was you who taught me how." He didn't say anything. He just held her hand, and that gesture said it all. An old employee, who had been with the company since her grandfather's time, retired and resigned. Before leaving, he gave her an envelope with an old photo. She's still a little girl, hidden behind her father's chair during a board meeting. On the back, he had written, "Since that day, I knew you were going to change everything. I just had to wait for you to come back." Jin kept the photo in her drawer, without a frame, without a fuss, as a reminder that some destinies announce themselves in silence. Her ex, now married to another woman, sent a simple message: "Thank you for raising our son with so much love." She replied with 3 words: "It was my duty." And that was it. No resentment, no closeness. Just the maturity of someone who knows that not every bond needs to be restored. Some only need to be respected. Years later, her son would write a book titled, "My Mother, the Empire That Was Born From." No. The release was low-key, but powerful. And upon seeing her name printed in the dedication, Jin realized that her story, even with all its pain, had found a home in words that would outlive time. In old age, she declined biographies, lifetime tributes, public medals. She used to say her greatest achievement was to be remembered in silence, through the actions of every woman who chose not to accept less than she deserved. She said those who need statues often never had time to build a real legacy. Once, already with gray hair, she was asked by a student, "How did you achieve all of this?" And she replied, "I didn't achieve everything. I just didn't stop." And with that, she summed up the essence of a journey that began in abandonment, passed through silence, and arrived at respect, not begged for, but inevitable. In her final interview, she was asked what she would leave for the world. She replied, "I'm not leaving an inheritance. I'm leaving a path. Whoever has the courage to follow it will understand." And she smiled. The camera captured the moment, and that image became eternal. The face of a woman who didn't have to be cruel to be strong. In the final chapter of her story, there was no audience, no speeches, only a note left on the table. To all those who thought about giving up, keep going. Because what's on the other side of pain is what you've been looking for all along. It was the signature of a woman who, alone, rewrote the destiny of an entire lineage. This story doesn't end with applause, nor with forced reconciliations. It ends with justice, with building, with the silent victory of someone who chose to be her own salvation. And that, anywhere in the world, in any era, will always be the most powerful ending. And if you followed this journey until here, know this. This isn't just a script, it's a mirror. And if you saw pieces of yourself in this story, then it's yours too. Subscribe now. Strengthen this project. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. This is your free drama channel here on YouTube. And here, every tear has a purpose, and every forgotten woman has a place to return. Tao.